This week, Kumar and Emmet discuss two books by Eleanor Davis, the story collection How to Be Happy, and a separately published short story called Libby's Dad. But first, if you're enjoying this podcast, support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. My brother Paul and I, hosts of To the Batpoles podcast, have been doing bi-weekly videos available to all patrons of TV trivia from the late 20th century. Most recently, I posed 5 questions about the 1982 sitcom Square Pegs. More perks and bonus content at higher donation levels, including our ongoing full-length podcast on 1960s Spider-Man comics. Pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics.
This is Kumar.
This is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing. I did it! I really did it! I always say that I can't pronounce the name of the show, and you laugh it off, and people are like, what are you talking about? I literally cannot say the word Deconstructing Comics, and I actually couldn't finish the word. Alright. This is Deconstructing Comics. None of that is going to be edited out. I'm in Melbourne. Emmett's out in the outskirts of Victoria, out past... I used to drive out there sometimes. There's a cute little town, and then... This is so vague.
Out on the way to Bendigo. Let's say that.
Okay, yeah.
That's it. We're on the way to Bendigo.
But there's a really kind of hippie-ish kind of town in the middle. It's not hippie-ish, it's very trendy now and popular.
Yeah.
What's it called?
Castlemaine?
No, it's not. It's got the name of some sort of wood or something. Anyway.
Daylesford.
Daylesford, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
very much so.
Yeah.
Folks, if ever you're traveling through Victoria and you do get to go to Daylesford, there's an amazing bakery just in the outskirts of town. And yes, you will be a hipster the minute you cross the threshold of this establishment. But oh my God, it is so good. The food is so good.
We had friends out there. We haven't visited them in, I'm going to say, more than before Ashton was born, so more than 13 years. But they were like musicians, and they had built their own they were building a mud brick house out there, and they were kind of living in a trailer while they were building this thing, and they're putting a studio in it. And even then, 15 years ago, the place was really kind of hip. It was very with it at the time, and from what I've heard, it's only more so now.
Oh yeah, it's very much a constant. Yeah, and there's a bunch of writers out this way and artists out this way, and yeah,
it felt that way. I don't think they were there at the time, but it felt like that's what it was, and now I think it actually is that.
It's gained reputation. But I did top up on my Melbourne experience today. I've been to and from Melbourne today for work.
Yeah, and last week too, right?
Yeah, last week was I think my second week doing it.
Okay.
So this is my first Monday doing it.
Okay.
And yeah, it's very strange being back in the city.
Yeah.
Because just today, at the time of recording, we've just heard that there was another 4 confirmed COVID cases in Melbourne. So things could change fast.
Yeah.
We don't know. But it's the cold weather. It's the people being indoors. This is the pattern we're seeing across the world.
Yeah.
So who knows? Fingers crossed. It's not too bad. But it's very curious being back in this familiar space and everything being unfamiliar. And I'm not just talking about closed businesses and so forth, which everyone's upset about. But I'm more about the ambient sense of unease. The people trying to pretend everything's normal, everything's clearly not normal, and I'm seeing lots of people who probably live on the streets or live rough in obvious distress.
Yep.
Because services haven't been there for them, or they haven't been supported over the past year and a half, and they've probably had to go through an awful time of it. So all of that was just hitting me as I was walking around the town today. Around the city, rather. So yeah, it's a very unusual experience. I love Melbourne. I think it's one of my favorite places in the world. But yeah, it's very curious to return in this situation. I wish we could all get vaccinated and be able to associate one another a little more freely. Like, we haven't seen each other.
Oh yeah.
In almost 2 years.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think. So it's just, and I had an actual social interaction with a comic book artist friend about, I want to say, a fortnight ago.
Okay.
Christian Rue, I'll give him a shout out. I know he listens to this podcast. He's a very good artist, and he's doing a lot of great work at the moment. If you follow him on social media, he's teasing lots of his pieces at the moment. And it was bewildering meeting somebody from pre-COVID times and sitting down and having a meal and saying, "So how are things?"
Yeah. Yeah. I actually think all of this is relevant.
I was going to say so, yeah.
Because today we're talking about Eleanor Davis's How to Be Happy. Now, so it's a collection of short stories. My first exposure to her work was You and a Bike and a Road from Koyama Press, which came out maybe, 5 years ago or something. I heard that was really good, so I bought that, and I absolutely loved it. And it's a straight biographical story about this journey of thousands of miles that she does on a bike, basically as a way of combating her depression. Sometimes suicidal ideation, and she's like, but when she gets on a bike, she feels good, so she goes on this journey. I think it's from like Georgia to Florida, or it's something. I don't know, that's completely wrong, but sorry. Anyway, I read that. And then I thought, okay, we should cover her on the show. We should do something. That book is very hard to get, I think. Then I went on to the All-Star Comics site, and they had one, which was The Hard Tomorrow by her. I said, okay, I'll buy this one, and we'll do that one. And I bought that, and then I went on to Comixology, and it's not on there. So that one's from Drawn and Quarterly. I don't know if Drawn and Quarterly doesn't do Comixology or what. But we did find by her on Comixology is How to Be Happy, and also a short story called Libby's Dad, which is about 30 pages. And How to Be Happy is about 160 pages or so of these.
And it's, as you said, it's a collection of short stories from Mome and other publications like that.
Yeah, I was wondering where they were from. Yeah, some of them I thought maybe they were on her website or something. I think she does have a pretty active website with comics on it and stuff. The Hard Tomorrow is a really interesting book. It's from 2019, but it's kind of set like 1 or 2 years in the future. And Zuckerberg is president, and it's about all these kind of Antifa protests. And but it's interesting because there's a disclaimer right in the opening of this book, which says, author's note, this is not actually a book about how to be happy. And it recommends some books for tackling depression. But actually, thematically, I mean, You and a Bike and a Road and The Hard Tomorrow, they are about, I think a lot of the stories in this are about people trying to be happy or find happiness or content in some way.
Well, as you said, the conversation we were just having and relating that to Eleanor Davis is relevant because so much of it is about navigating unease or anxiety. So it's how to be happy in the sort of original Epicurean sense, which is to minimize exposure to hurt or harm or stress.
Yeah.
Which was what Epicurus was talking about. He wasn't talking about indulging yourself. He was talking about avoidance. And that was his grand philosophical idea.
Right.
And I feel some of these stories, I'm looking at the story there is a sense in some of these stories of creeping unease, disturbance, and the art style is typically deceptive in terms of lulling you to a false sense of security. I think this is a comment we can make about her.
Well, yes, you can, but I also think that her art style varies widely from story to story. It's astonishing the range of styles she's able to accommodate or just to pour herself into.
Sometimes hyper detailed, sometimes quite rough, sometimes quite sometimes clearly owning a debt to classic art, sometimes like scribbles on a notepad.
Yeah, and sometimes they're long stories, sometimes they're vignettes, or they're almost tone poems. There's a whole range of different page designs. It's not just the art style itself. The way she approaches pages or even whole stories is completely different from story to story. But yes, you're right. Some of them are so beautiful that the sadness that's in them.
The one I was thinking of, well, and I hadn't put it down on my list of like the ones I wanted to talk about, but it's definitely one that I'm really interested in, is the boatman with the various goblin creatures.
That's an interesting one, because that's the one that I thought there's such a How to Be Happy is such a perfect title for this collection of stories. I wonder if she like looked at the stories and was like, aha, this is about people trying to be happy. But that was the one that I was like, oh, okay, it's a boatman going back and forth in these. It's kind of a fable, right, with like these talking foxes and things that come over with bags of. One of them we know is rabbits for sure, but they've got living things in them. And that was the one that I thought was like, oh, how does this really fit in thematically? So what was your take on it?
Well, I thought it's what I was just talking about, the idea of avoidance. So in that case, it becomes increasingly clear that it's not rabbits in the bags.
Okay.
It becomes increasingly clear that the boatman is complicit in something deeply evil.
Okay.
And he instead chooses to believe it's just rabbits or conies or whatever you want to you want to use, and just row his boat and make his money.
Right.
You know, it's the yuppie defense. You know, I got to pay the mortgage.
Oh my God, that's such a good take on that story, and I never saw it. Yeah, you're right, because that's the last line of it, isn't it? Is they're just rabbits, he says, or something? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're totally right.
So yeah, that's one that's all about choosing what to believe.
Right.
And you know, I think that particular story. I mean, there's hints of. You can draw a parallel between that and, say, Emily Carroll's Through the Woods. You know, that sort of malevolent fairy tale.
Yeah.
You know, a bloody-lipped Grimm's brother story. There's something really nasty happening in it, but we don't dwell on it. We're not shown it. We're just left with the sense of what may or may not be happening. Like the last time when we talked about Emily Carroll, I made the comparison with The Bloody Chamber, didn't I?
Yes.
Angela Carter. So, and again, there's a bit of Angela Carter here too. I'm not saying one before the other. I'm saying there's a parallel I'd easily draw there. But as you said before, the other stories are so varied. This is not a consistent feature. This approach isn't consistent. But I think in each case, there's this notion of sadness or fear or depression, and how to maybe negotiate with those feelings. I think that's the theme of the collection, and it seems to be an overarching theme of her work. I would also add Libby's dad to this as well.
Yeah.
The threat of danger, and then choosing the easy answer, choosing the easy narrative.
Yes.
So you don't have to reflect on that danger.
Yeah.
That threat.
Yep. Well, do we want to? Were there others you really wanted to hone in on, or do you want to go through them in order to talk about them, or?
Well, I mean, let's. If I'd throw one out there, I'd throw out "No Tears, No Sorrow" as one to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. It's the last one.
It's the last one. I know. I'm skipping to the end here.
But, no, that's cool. It's a good one.
It sort of gives folks a sense. It's the so we have a how would you describe it? A help group?
Yeah, kind of a self-help group kind of thing, but it's one of those. It's almost like one of those paid. What's the word for it? It's like a program almost, or you go in and hear this guy talk on stage. Basically, there's audience interaction, but his whole thing is that that tears are proof of sorrow or something like that, and then sorrow is you need to have sorrow to have joy. So basically these are people who can't cry, or they haven't cried in a long time, whatever, and so basically the group is he's training them to be able to cry so that they can feel sorrow, so that they can feel joy. And the main character in it is there because she's got to go to her mom's funeral or something in a couple of weeks, and she wants to be able to cry at the funeral. So she's got to be able to call up the tears. I wonder if this is actually... It seemed like a real thing. Like somebody... it feels like a real... This could happen in California, that somebody has this kind of self-help program that almost feels like a pyramid scheme. It feels so scammy, but it works. It works for them in the end, it seems.
Well, it seems to basically unlock a different pathology.
Yes. Yes.
There's the suggestion of the cure being worse than the disease, almost.
Yeah. Because at the end, spoiler for the last page of the whole book, she can't stop crying. It's like she's in the grocery store and she can't stop crying. It's the tap has been turned on and there's no turning it off. But it felt like a very authentic. It felt like one of those programs that's held in like a hotel ballroom that they've rented out to hold this thing or whatever.
And there's a bit of humor to it too. I mean, it's humorous in that it's all about crying and sadness and being incapable of expressing that sadness and being trapped with those feelings of guilt. That's clearly what this is about.
Yeah, and it's kind of the ridiculous
concept,
and that's quite funny. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
It's quite good. And then there's the bit, there's a person in the audience called Lydia.
Yeah.
And he prompts somebody to, and without sorrow we can have no, and she says, joy?
Yeah.
It's excellent, Lydia. How did you know that? Oh, I have your book. And we see the cover of the book. It's no tears, no sorrow, no tears, no sorrow, no joy.
Yeah.
Which is a lovely joke.
Yeah.
He literally called the book that.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's got these, almost stick figure diagram slides that he shows in this PowerPoint presentation of sad things happening. Yeah, suffering and people's misery, and he's trying to kind of generate sorrow, and there's this whole process. And it's also, it just seems so phony that it was... I found that, I agree. I think if there's any laughs in this volume, they're kind of ironic laughs out of this one. But then it actually starts to work, which is quite shocking. I think this might be one of the longest ones too. I wrote down most of the page counts. It's 12 pages. It's not quite the longest, but it's one of the longer stories in here. And and I also have to say, through all the books I've read of hers, she does some of the best transcribing of the onomatopoeia of crying.
Yeah.
Because you never know how to do that in comics, and she has figured out. She's done it pretty well.
It's the chest heave.
Yeah.
Cry.
Yeah.
Where you can't control how you're crying.
Yeah.
And you're literally losing control of your body.
Yeah.
And she's vocalizing that.
Yeah.
It's quite beautiful.
Yeah. And with this one guy's finally, one guy's like, but the drawings, that's all real suffering in the world. And the host of this conference is like, Matt has broken through not just his own sorrow, he's reached a profound state of empathy for the vast sorrow of the entire world, and everybody applauds, which is kind of how these things go. But then the main character has been left out of that kind of pat response to it, and then she's left told a complete mess wherever she goes.
And the final page is very similar to the final page of Libby's dad, which again is a woman breaking down in tears in a supermarket in this sort of artificial space. The supermarket is where you go to purchase food that's been found by somebody else and put together and presented to you for an inflated price. You feed your family. But like that unusual fakeness and then losing control in such a place, in such a plastic place. I sound like a Radiohead song. Just makes it worse.
Yeah.
Because people are looking at you.
I found in Libby's dad too, which we'll have to talk about in a bit more detail later, because that's 30 plus pages, I think. The mom who's having this breakdown, I mean, the kids don't understand her, or they don't even want to understand her, but she's actually, they make it seem like she's the one that's done she's in the wrong.
Yeah.
But obviously she has some mental health issue. And it's kind of completely dismissed.
Yeah, not like potentially. Yeah, potentially. Or she could just be she could be sobbing because her marriage is over.
Yeah, sure.
She's in this situation. She's in this place where she would have had to go to provide for her family, and now her family's been broken up, and her husband's bought this, house where her daughter wants to go and play with her friends, and she's being isolated. So, I wouldn't necessarily make a determination as to what's going on with her, but you could just be crying and being sad because your life's falling apart.
So I meant by mental health, I meant maybe like just a severe depression, like something.
Sure. Yeah. No,
like that.
Absolutely. And it's that, that lachrymose state, that utter, just leaking water.
Yeah.
Out of your body, and again losing control of your functions. I'm having a memory. I was walking down the suburban street in the middle of the night, near where my parents' home is in Dublin, close to Belfield campus for UCD, which is University College Dublin, outside of the city. And I'm walking down towards the traffic lights, and this woman pulls up to the lights, and she's in the car alone, and she's just crying.
Yeah.
She was like screaming, crying. But her windows were up, so I couldn't actually hear her. I could hear a dull sort of sound, but I couldn't hear her really. I couldn't. Whatever sound was happening in that car, the extent of it wasn't clear to me. And I've never seen somebody so utterly lost, like utterly bereft, and whatever was happening in that person's life, like it was incredibly distressing to her, and I felt like I was intruding on a moment. But she was driving on a public road. She wasn't stopping. She had to get wherever she had to get to or get away from. She needed to do that. So I stood there at the pedestrian lights and waited to cross, and crossed, and didn't look back. But I'm having a moment there because I feel that's the emotional honesty of Eleanor Davis's work, that she's capturing moments in time, which is something we say comics are best at doing. And I think Eleanor Davis, when you said we would talk about her, I got so excited because I'm moved by her work in a way that I'm rarely moved by it with other creators.
I'll tell you my crying story was when I was 13 and I was in the Boy Scouts. We had to go door to door selling apples, and we knocked on one door, and this guy answered it, a young man, and he was completely in tears. Now, he'd answered the door anyway.
Yeah.
And we went through the routine, like, would you like to buy some apples for the Boy Scouts?
No.
And he was like, no, not today or whatever, and he walked away. And I said to my friend, he must be on drugs.
Oh, no.
Yeah, well, I was 13, and much like these girls were dismissing Libby's mom,
the embarrassment
it was exactly the same. Yeah. I had that same teenage reaction that they did at the time. So, I got that story. I really got it.
Yeah. No, and like, again, like if you're depressed, or I mean, one of the key things that is described of depression is the isolation, and it is the sense that you can't connect with someone else. And if only you could, maybe that would alleviate the depression.
Right.
And that's part of the issue. And I'm not a psychologist. I don't want to stray too far into waters that are not my own. But I would suspect the fact that we put such weight in society on not embarrassing other people, not being a bother, not making a show of yourself, as they'd say back home in Ireland. Not being embarrassing. Is a contributing factor to the extent of a person's depression, because they know that it'll be difficult for them to be able to have those conversations or connections that they need to have. And that's if they feel capable of even attempting that, which is, again, one of the reasons depression is so insidious. It deliberately isolates you. I was, just before we started our conversation, I was listening to bloody NPR for my sins, and That's good sometimes, but sometimes it's annoying as hell. But they're reviewing, and this, folks listening, this is our Steve Buscemi, how do you do, fellow kids, moment of this recording from 30 Rock, like that amazing meme.
Yeah.
So anyway, they're reviewing Olivia Rodrigo's album Sour. Now, like all those hip 40-something adults, I know who this is.
Right.
I really don't. I just listened to the review. I'm aware that a lot of people are talking about this teenager, this young, I don't know if she's still a teenager, but she's a young woman who's just released her debut album, and she's been praised for the quality of her songwriting, the quality of her singing, the quality of the music, and there's this sense of her coming out of nowhere. But she's an actress. She's established as a talent, and she turns out tapped into the Taylor Swift of it all, and this is what they're saying in the review. Like, there's a lot of contemporary singers that she's clearly mining in her own work. But the observation they made in the review, which made me think of Eleanor Davis, was that here is a young woman who is, and maybe this is a feature of her generation, very conscious of her own emotional state and her own psychological state.
Right.
And deconstructing and discussing and airing out your mental health, your mental well-being, what's going on in your head, basically, is a feature of this generation's cultural output and the mode of expression that they seem to have. Whereas I think, I could be swinging for the back of the stadium here, I feel as if our generation, we were more concerned with a style of voice. Like adopting a style of voice that's been established, that we relate to, or that we somehow feel represents us, or we want it to represent us. And maybe that's the difference in time and in how we have emerged as cultural beings. I think we attach ourselves to movements or personalities. Young people today, seem to actually want to be emotionally honest.
Yes.
And I found it interesting that Francois Mouly's comment on Eleanor Davis is she says the things. She says what's going on.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the stories are subtle, man. Like, I mean, like you mentioned about the rabbits. I mean, none of this stuff is really, it's never explicitly talking about feelings. And like I said, there's lots of kind of tone poem kind of stuff in here that are just like 1 or 2 page stories. Like there's one where you go into a room and you can leak out your emotions into the room, and then you leave the room and you have a glass of lemon water or orange juice or something, and that's the end. It's like 2 pages, and it's not really explicit about these are my feelings or whatever. You do have to tease out the meaning in the stories.
But the metaphor is really interesting because the room allows you to not just release your feelings, but to excrete your feelings, and then literally, if you want to take a shit, you can take a shit. Yeah. Or have a sexual release or whatever it is you want to do. But there is this sense of it just being effluvia, like waste.
Yeah.
And I find that very interesting because it's not the. And again, I think this is from before our time, but like, primal scream therapy and this whole idea of trying to get in touch with your inner self. And it's not that at all. It's like shedding a skin.
Yeah, it's a real wish fulfillment fantasy, like that you have these horrible feelings and you can just go into a room and they'll just leak out of your pores. And then you can just walk out and have a glass of water and be whole again. Be the person you wanted to be again. It's a really fascinating take on it, for sure.
Coming up, more on how to be happy and the separately published story Libby's Dad. Don't forget you can help to unlock classic early episodes of Deconstructing Comics, help me return all the old episodes to this podcast feed, and at the $4 level, get access to hours of additional full-length podcasts. At the $10 level, you can review the book of your choice with me here on this show. Support Deconstructing Comics and our other shows at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or you can send a one-time donation via PayPal to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support. When you watched Batman as a kid, you enjoyed the colorful heroes and villains, the text sound effects on the screen, the thrill of watching a heroic crime fighter escaping from death traps and taking down bad guys. But the show was devised to interest adults, too. What did you miss as a kid? Sexual innuendo.
The penguin's too small for me.
Closeted gay characters.
I like that cape, Batman.
Freudian death traps.
Has the giant clam really swallowed Robin?
Police incompetence.
Bruce Wayne is a millionaire playboy. Hardly a secret identity for Batman.
Whether you're a kid or an adult, there's something to like about our favorite Caped Crusader. Tim and Paul dig for the deeper meanings under the Batmania every other Thursday. What's the podcast's name?
To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles.
Reminds me of another short one. Darling, I realized I don't love you. I think maybe this is my favorite. It's 4 pages.
I was looking forward to this because I didn't put this on my list, but I did wonder what you made of this. Given that you're a parent and I'm not a parent.
This is, yeah, I do wonder that too. But okay, so we've got 2 talking heads. I'm gonna have to just go through the whole thing. There's a woman on one side, a man on the other. It's just the same panel of their faces looking basically towards us, the reader. Got 2 blank panels. They're not blank, but just their face. They're not saying anything. The woman says, if I loved anyone, it would be you, but I love no one. The man says, I've come to understand I don't care about anything except for myself. The woman says, any kindness I've ever shown has been in my own self-interest. The man says, the very existence of other people seems doubtful. She says, I wanted more from life than this. He says nothing. And then she says, let's have a baby. Then you turn the page. You got 1 panel. It doesn't fill the whole page. It's just a panel at the top with the fetus.
It's quite cramped.
Yeah. Next page, you've got the couple looking curiously down. Then she picks up the baby and she holds the baby, and it's the end. And they're not smiling or anything, but it is literally addressed every one of those points. Those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that they said. Like, if I loved anyone, it would be you, but I love no one. I don't care about anything except for myself. Any kindness I've ever shown has been in my own self-interest. The very existence of other people seems doubtful. I wanted more from life than this. And her solution that she offers after a pause, is let's have a baby. And it's, I mean, I didn't read their lack of smiles as unhappiness. I think all the answers are there. It's really fascinating to me, this one. I really, really did love this one. But what did you make of it?
Yeah,
because this is obviously not a solution for everybody.
Well, it's not a solution.
That's true. Yeah,
is the first thing I'd say. But also, it is a depiction of depression that I find very interesting, because it's a relationship where neither party is like they're being brutally honest with one another. At least that's how this dialogue would normally be interpreted. But I don't think that's the case.
Right.
Because I think they're literally stating, they're not trying to hurt one another. They're simply reflecting on the fact that they have nothing.
Right.
There's nothing there.
Yes.
There's nothing in the relationship.
Yeah.
And then she says, let's have a baby. Yeah. Which is the cliche about the relationship's in trouble. Oh, well, get pregnant. That will, that will force you to have to stay together to raise a child. Which is the secret of many bad families, and bad marriages. But yeah, that the final page I saw as, oh no, here's the consequences of our actions. Almost like this sense of, well, there's a life now.
Honestly, my thing was I read these 2 pages and then, clicked the next arrow on Comixology. I wasn't really, I thought that was going to be the end of the story. Let's have a baby, the end. And to me, to actually have this fetus and then they're looking at this thing and being in, she's drawn these lines under her eyes, like maybe she's a little bit older. It's just fascinating to me that this story actually continued 2 pages, and there's more to think about. And again,
she's had a child, so she's worn out.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, she's very. What I'm saying is, I guess, related to the other one. She's not explicit about what they're thinking. I don't know how old she is. Maybe she's between these two generations we're talking about.
She's slightly younger than us.
Okay.
She's like 2 or 3 years younger than us.
Okay. But I find it very interesting that she doesn't lay it out. And you've really got to... I mean, I stared at these pages for a while. And I am even now really wondering what they're thinking in that last panel. But it really did... It addressed... Let's say it's not the solution. It addresses all those questions. Yeah, it's really interesting. And then we get this bizarre 2-page thing about this guy cutting off this woman's fingers. Like she's asleep and she looks really content. And he's just holding her hand gently. And he's got scissors and it's almost a self-harm fantasy with someone else doing it to her. It's bizarre. But really, again, I stared at this one for a long time too. Okay, any others we want to bring up?
I really like Summer Snakes.
Okay, interesting one, yeah.
Very short one.
Yeah.
So it's about, I believe it's a teenage boy, and he's narrating the story, and he mentions being, I think it's 15, over summer, and he has new neighbors, and he climbs up a tree, and he sees this man mowing the lawn in the back of the house next door. And Eleanor Davis, she draws some of her men extremely top heavy, like, you know, they got Bluto-esque physiques, you know, they're very, very muscly men. And so he's like rendered in this, it's quite minimalist style, but like very big muscles on him. And he's pushing the lawnmower around. And the boy then meets the daughter of this neighbor, and she hints at some sort of secret behind her father's identity. And then she puts on a film. I'm just going to tell the story. She puts on a film called Summer Snakes.
Yeah.
And we realize that the film not only stars her father looking exactly the same, even though it seems to be a film from decades in the past.
Yeah.
He's doing the same thing. He's mowing the grass. And then the young boy and the young girl turn to look at us because we're now the voyeurs.
Yeah.
So you've gone from this young boy staring like this, you know, there's this sense of sexuality at work here, and there's this sense of desire and looking at bodies and looking at people, and then we are made complicit. It's Peeping Tom all over, like literally the movie Peeping Tom, where the audience is made complicit in a series of murders because the camera becomes the killing weapon of the murderer. And I feel like that's similar to this sense of being forced to confront the fact that you are a voyeur in these characters' lives, and they're aware that you're there as well. I thought it was very impactful.
This is a very mysterious kind of David Lynchy kind of thing. She says that Gene Gale, this actor, was a big star in the 50s, and he's my favorite actor. And she walks in, she says, "I'm home, Daddy," and we don't see his face cut off by the wall. Now, we've seen his face during the lawn mowing scene at the start of the story a few pages ago. And now suddenly we don't see his face, and then she turns on the movie, and it is her dad. Was this... It's so strange. And and then they kiss, and then they turn and look at us, the viewer, as if we've caught them watching this movie about her favorite actor, which was her father, but now maybe we're not... I mean, you can't really delineate it that specifically, but it's just so strange. She says he works for the government, for national defense.
Sure, yeah.
Bizarre. Such a strange little...
She's trying to intrigue him. She's trying to intrigue this young boy. Make her interesting to him.
Yeah.
And she's telling stories. But then these are all stories. So it's a story within a story within a story.
Yeah.
So these are fictions.
Yeah.
Contained within the borders of the comic page or within the borders of her laptop.
Yeah.
The DVD she puts on. And then are we to suggest that she's got a poster of her father in her bedroom?
Yeah. Bizarre.
You know?
Yeah.
So again, it's this notion of these fictional characters exist within different worlds almost. And Eleanor Davis has created this layering effect and then we get dragged in too. Because for the final panel, we are now being looked at by these characters.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's one of my favorite stories in the collection. I think it's very unnerving.
Yeah.
Lynch obviously would be a point of inquiry, but it's just the general sense of voyeurism. I find it very, very interesting. And like a lot of these stories, I mean, we don't talk about Eleanor Davis as we've talked about the stories, but her use of color, her use of orange, ochre, white, a lot of white space, blue, very interested in blue. If you go online, if you look for reviews of Eleanor Davis, which I have, you will see that one Hilary Brown is quite the champion. She's written about her for the Comics Journal. She's written about her for Paste magazine. She's written about her for Paste magazine multiple times, and she talks about how they know each other, they're friends. But Hilary talks about her style, her diversity of style. She's able to take on, as you said before yourself. But I'm fascinated with just this idea of vegetation is something Hilary Brown brought up.
Right.
Flowers and plants, particularly in Libby's Dad, the idea of flora and fauna just crowding the panels.
Yeah, the first story in this one too, which was these people who've tried to go back to an idyllic lifestyle by they've gone back to living off the land, and they're all called Adam or Eve. And the guy who started it was this manager of some sort of generic franchise store of some sort. I don't remember which one, but they've gone out to live in the woods. And yeah, that one also is just. Especially as the people start disappearing, everybody starts quitting. There's only two of them left. When Adam and Eve, they're just surrounded by this lush world.
Yeah, and like the people in this commune, they explicitly think and they refer to this as like a paleo society, and he's clearly not interested in that.
Yeah.
It's not. He keeps shifting the goalposts as to what they're actually doing.
Yeah,
and what a return to the utopia of Eden actually means.
Yeah,
he keeps changing the rules. That's why they're leaving. But I think that's really interesting as well, because it's this notion of not just personal depression, personal disconnection from others. It's our own disconnection from the natural world.
Yeah,
and the fact that, and this is why I was harping on with supermarkets before, because I think that's a really interesting image. If you talk about the fact that we have no connection to the land, to produce, to fruits and vegetables, to growing things, people talk about like growing a potted plant as if it's this amazing revelation. The other story that is similar is Nita Goes Home.
Yeah, let's talk about this one because it's quite long and it's really interesting. There's a lot of incident in it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff going on in it for a 14-page story. Okay, but you wanna start in on it?
Well, I think I've spoken quite a lot, so I'm happy to pass the ball to you.
Okay.
I would simply say the reason I draw the comparison between this and the Eden story is because of the idea of natural fruits and vegetables.
Yes, yeah, and that comes up. I mean, they're right back to back. So the Eden one is the first story, and the story about this woman Nita in the future, the science fiction story, is the one that comes almost right after it. There's a little interlude with these people climbing into a bag made in the Netherlands for 4 pages, which I also thought was, given the title of the book, you have to look at it as people trying to find a way to be happy, and I definitely saw that way too. But anyway, so we've got this girl in the future. She lives in this place called Satori Space, which is a kind of a perfect, it's almost a utopia. She's a designer or an artist of some sort. She does suffer from anxiety, which I thought was interesting for a very short story. It's one of the many elements that are in it. So because her father's dying, she has to go back to where she grew up, which is in the outside world. So she's got to wear like protection from the toxic air. And there's floating screens everywhere, a bit like like Minority Report or something, and they're causing more anxiety for her. and she eats only this organic food, which is called Gaia grown. And she has the privilege of doing that because I guess she has the money, or as an art designer that's making money, she is able to live off that food. But the people who live out there, actually, it's like a lot more expensive to get something that tastes this. That's more expensive than the stuff they can get, which is non-organic.
I mean, I would just quickly interject there in that this Gaia-grown fruit is more expensive for people back on Earth or wherever they are to buy, and I saw it almost like a tobacco plantation at the end. I think she's a laborer.
Yeah, right.
I think she's indentured herself.
Okay.
To this work so she could get out of this place in America that's so heavily polluted and so crowded and nasty. Is it on Mars? Because they talk about how they're, as children, herself and I believe her sister wanted to go to Mars.
I thought it was all on Earth. I thought there were two different cities. That was my take on it. Was that there was some people got to live in a dome because they had the for whatever reason, and the rest of people were forced to wear these suits that they zip up so that they can survive in the toxic air or whatever.
You are of course right. You can see the train leaving the biome and it's going into the heavily urbanized megacity space. But
another thing in here besides there's the death of the father happening, and there's a nostalgia for earlier times. Now that she's visited home, she was like, I kind of wish I missed this thing or that thing, and the father and the sister are like, you used to complain about that, and her response is, I was 19 when I said that. And she even thinks about moving back before the father passes away, and then she ends up going back, and she's picking these blueberries, these organic blueberries. But I don't know what to say about it, but there's a lot of stuff. The art is really beautiful. And
there's lots of hints of babushkas.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, she makes those, right? She sold one to some celebrity.
It's Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's kid.
Right.
It's Maddox Jolie Pitt.
Okay, yeah.
So it's an actual person.
Yeah. There's some weird pop cultural references in her work, which you wouldn't expect. Like there's occasionally mentions of Star Wars or some, really chintzy pop song or something like that. But they do pop in there once in a while. And she does, and The Hard Tomorrow is kind of a science fiction or, alternate future kind of story, even though it's only 1 year in the future or whatever. And this is another real, like not hard science fiction, but it is a full science fiction story. But it's the same, the best science fiction stories are about the present, and it's the same thing. It's the organic food and trying to connect with her father, all that stuff. It's the same as all the other stories in a way. And
again,
sense.
the use of color is just so striking, and I love that. I love how she fills each panel with incident, even though you may be people just having a conversation, but there's so many things that catch the eye and so many actions happening. Yeah, even if it's just a touch, but there's something quite moving about it. Again, like it's not static. There's a warmth to her art. Yeah. And to the bodies, the way she draws bodies and faces, that I find very compelling.
Speaking of which, there's another one I want to talk about, which is in 2006, I took a Greyhound from Georgia to Los Angeles. So this is a 5-page story. It's the first 2 pages. It's a grid of 20 panels, 5 by 4, and this is the closest in this book to You and a Bike in a Road, in that it seems it's very autobiographical. She just meets these characters. I actually went to the city today. I watched to go to the cinema. I watched Nomadland, and it reminded me a little bit because every character is really interesting, and there's lots of just all these people on the bus, all these people on a bus from Georgia to Los Angeles. Then you turn the page after 2 pages of this, and suddenly you get this 2-page giant spread of the hands of God coming down from the clouds in color. So the story is all black and white, except for these 2 hands done in these beautiful pastel colors. And then, but you get to page 5 and it's just back to the bus, and I didn't really know what to make of it, but it was amazing. And it's a real, read it twice, forgot about it somehow, got to the second time, was just as shocked. It was a real awe-inspiring moment of these hands, over the oil fields, the desert, and the hands are in color and very photorealistically drawn compared to the very sketchbook type art of the other 3 pages of the story.
It reminds me of Nicholas Gurwich's Perry Bible.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Where he would do this occasionally.
Yeah, he did that. Yeah, that's right.
The shock of color, the shock of realism into a cartoonish space.
Yeah.
But and the other point of comparison I'd make is Stephen King's The Stand, where you had a very similar incident.
Right.
That I think he's been mocked for ever since. And certainly The Stand has one of the all-time Stephen King duffer endings. But the previous 2 pages, as you say, are stuffed with cruelty.
Yeah.
Like cruelty. Awful things she's witnessing.
Yeah.
On this greyhound. It's like a microcosm of all these cruel relationships or cruel actions. Vulnerable people being attacked, being abused, people being kicked off the bus for whatever reason. There's a runaway girl as well, which is quite, again, these just moments she's witnessed and there's nothing she can do. She can't interfere. These are people's lives just passing by, like a greyhound passes people by, and she's staring up after all of this stuff, like a barking dog. After all this going on, she's staring at the window all across the oil fields into the clouds. We see her face, and then we cut to this 2-page spread of the heavenly hands descending, which is entirely unreal, and I think it's meant to throw in relief the cruelty of the previous 2 pages, as if to mock you for looking for some sort of resolution to this.
Right.
Where do you think this story is going?
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah.
Nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
This ride will continue, and these awful people will continue being awful, and then you've got this moment between her and another passenger, and it's such a non sequitur how it ends. And I love it.
Yeah. Something you said, I don't remember what now, already I've forgotten, reminded me of the gluten-free story. So this is another interesting one, a bit like the baby one, where you get 4 talking heads of 4 different women, or maybe it's even the same woman with different hair. Okay, so one says, I used to be unhappy, then I got on Prozac. The next one says, I used to be unhappy, then I took a meditation. Next one says, I used to be unhappy, then I had a baby. I used to be so unhappy, then I tried yoga. Then we turn the page, we get a very heartbreaking page of a woman's face crying. And then we get the 3rd and final page of the story where she talks about how there's nothing wrong in her life, but she has a good job and a husband and children. But she still gets this heavy depression that weighs on her. And this woman she's talking to says, don't lose hope. I know life can sometimes feel black. I know how you feel, but not since I went gluten-free. And she says, gluten-free? Turns out my depression was really a form of wheat allergy. And the next panel, the final panel of the story, she's in the grocery store looking at this bread with kind of a little smile on her, a curious smile on her face, maybe. Mona Lisa smile.
Grocery store again.
Yes. Grocery store again, but maybe it's true that her problem is a wheat allergy. It's really, it's a solution. Again, maybe solution's not the right word, but it seems like it's
I'm such a negative Nancy. I can't believe this really is a Rorschach test as far as our respective personalities. You're like, maybe she's happy. Maybe she's actually got a gluten problem. And I'm looking at her going, no.
Yeah, I know.
This is desperate need to have found the answer, but it's not the answer.
I know it's not the answer, but I'm trying to interpret this weird smile. Is it a smile on her face in the last panel? And she's holding this bread. She's thinking about it. she's like, this is another thing I could try. I could try the yoga. I could try that. This is another. Maybe it's this thing. She's thinking. Maybe she's smiling. Maybe she's not. Maybe she's looking at it like, no way, in disbelief. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw it as desperation.
Yeah, totally. It could be too. But the way she's drawn that character's face, I felt like it didn't leave. It didn't look like desperation. But we don't know what she's feeling on the inside and what she's hiding and all that kind of stuff, which is, what many of the stories are about.
Isn't it interesting as well? Like, isn't it interesting so much of these comics are reliant on our interpretations of facial expression and bodies and the actions of these characters, because so much of the monologue, dialogue, self-expression that happens on the page is a feint, is a distraction almost, is somebody trying to make good or trying to put on a brave face, but we're left to look at them and make judge for ourselves how much of that is true. I think that's quite interesting. I think that's quite insightful, just in terms of people get by. Okay, I'll give you an example drawn from today. So I had an interaction with somebody today, and I did not want to. I enjoy working from home. I think I've spoken to Tim about this in another episode. I like working from where I'm sitting talking to you right now. I actually have a setup at home. I have thank God I can do that. I do have the means to do that, but I'm able to operate from here and do my job. But now they wanted to go back to the city and use up these office spaces. So I'm in the office, and I met somebody today, and they're, isn't it great seeing everyone again and just being there for one another? Isn't that really great? And I was going, I was like, I didn't want to be cruel to the person, but at the same time I was like, well, no, because I'm here to do a job. Yeah. I can do that job. I interact with you remotely. That's fine. We can leave it at that. And if I want any social reinforcement, I seek it out outside of my work, which I see as good and proper. But I know there's this belief that, no, you need to have that social element within your workplace. I'm going, well, no, your workplace is the place you go so that you earn your keep, you get paid to go and do things you want to do. Yeah. And that's the divide. That's the, so I felt the conversation we were having was very much two different sides of, there was politeness at work. There was a lot of projection going on, is what I'm saying. We were both trying to put on a brave face. We were both trying to say what we feel, but not actually maybe step too far out of line. Yeah. There was a bit of a dance going on. Yeah. It was an interesting situation to be in. But, had I been honest, I would have shut down that conversation. Right. Right. Excuse me, are you kidding? I could be home right now. Yeah. I could be sitting at home with my kitten. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I miss so much, so damn much. Yeah. This is the conversation. These are the conversations we tend not to have, because there's this social expectation that you be polite, don't step out of line, don't cause a fuss, and this is why I relate to Eleanor Davis so much, because she sort of smashes through all of that.
Did we want to say any more about Libby's dad?
I find it very unnerving. Yeah. I find it very disturbing. So, How to Be Happy was Fantagraphics. Libby's dad was
Retrofit.
And I liked a lot of their stuff. And I know Davis has done work for Nobrow, and certainly there's a style of art from Nobrow that I think is on the same spectrum as Davis's art. Yeah. But Retrofit as well, some of the stuff out there. This willingness to be spare in your detail occasionally. Yes. And eyes, nose, mouth. Yeah. Boom, you're done. You got yourself a face. Like there's no need. And trusting in color to sell
Yeah,
about.
it looks like she's done it in color pencils, I'm guessing. It's really very... You can see the hands.
See the rubbing.
Yeah, the rubbing. Yeah.
Like there's this. I'm looking at this. So there's two girls on this particular page, but it's a group of girls at the Libby's dad's pool house space. So he's now moved out of the family home, and he's in this new house, and he's got this set up with the pool, and they're all hanging out, and they're in their bathers, and there's all this plant life, vegetation, as I mentioned before. But on this page, two girls are standing beneath a giant bush of blue leaves with red tips.
Yeah.
And it's quite detailed, while still clearly being pencil work. And I find that quite beautiful, almost. Yeah. Like, we went on and on about Emile Ferris's My Favorite Thing is Monsters for similar detail of what would be considered typically a rough artistic implement in comics.
Yeah.
But still achieving so much with it.
Yeah. Might be pastels. Anyway, I'm not an expert. It might be because some of the spaces are really solid, so it looks like pastels. Yeah, I don't think we need to go into all the details of the story, but it's I don't know how to talk about it without going into all the details, but it is really... I think we did kind of cover it when we talked about the mom.
These teenage girls on the periphery of a very traumatic adult relationship breakup.
Yeah.
And they're almost free associating what's happening, and then their emotional states are basically what we are reading about.
Yeah. So the mom and dad Libby's mom and dad have broken up. Dad's bought a new house, but there's a rumor that Libby's dad owns a gun and threatened to kill the mom with it. This leads to a lot of kind of teenage rumor stuff. One girl hasn't been allowed to come to this party supposedly because the mom of that girl heard this rumor. Then there's a spilling of nail polish.
Red nail polish,
yeah.
Yeah.
And
which is very important.
There's a fear that the dad's going to come in with his gun and kill the kids because he's so insanely angry that they believe the story that he has this raging temper. Libby, of course, herself doesn't believe any of this. She says literally, "My dad's not scary," and she goes to tell him what happened, and he comes in and he's this middle-aged dude and he cleans it up and wasn't mad. And they take that as proof that Libby's mom is crazy and a liar. Literally, those are her words. Wow.
And we just see the girls like playing in the pool.
Yeah, and Libby's mom is holding a box of Fruit Loops or whatever and gushing tears, as you described before. It's a gut punch. Yeah.
This whole comic is a gut punch, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just so much of it is. Again, I think this is something we need, this generation of kids coming out of their early 20s now. What is it like knowing that the entire culture of your country, I'm talking about principally America here, what is it like knowing that the entire culture will sit by and let you all get murdered because it infringes on their rights to own guns? What's that like? The fact that you had to do daily drills or weekly drills or whatever the horrible repetition of incipient danger from an adult with a gun, or another student with a gun, and I without saying too much, when I was growing up, we had an incident in Ireland where somebody brought a gun to school. And I won't give any further details. Gun ownership is not a big thing in Ireland. It's not. It's not something that we have the same culture of. But I think it was I think it was an old gun. I think it was potentially a hunting gun or something.
Okay.
And nothing happened. Thankfully, the situation was stopped before it escalated. But I remember that, and I remember how unreal it was, and I remember how people immediately treated it like a joke.
Right.
Because it hadn't happened to us.
Yeah.
what's it like to be a kid in a culture where it happens all the time?
Yeah.
And it's very real.
Yeah.
Well, what does that do to you? And, these leaders or these commentators will stand in their pulpits and whatever, or their platforms, and talk about video games and movies and music and how they're influencing young minds. But they won't talk about the fact that kids are getting killed and you're not going to stop it happening. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, terrifying, but like, just the thought of that amazes me.
Yeah.
But that's sort of interwoven into this story, because these girls, they arrive at this fantasy, well, this, reasonable fear, rather. Sorry, I shouldn't undercut them. That because they've damaged Libby's dad's new home, he'll go on a killing spree.
Yeah.
And he has all the power, and he has a gun, supposedly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a gut punch.
Yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts about these really remarkable comics that can be sad, or I actually think many years ago we talked about building stories by what's his name? Chris Ware. And I was really disappointed by how relentlessly depressing it was. And it really didn't offer any paths to get out of that. And I actually think these stories are all people trying to find a way to be happy, whether it works or not. Well, not all of them, but, in general, her stories are about people trying to find that contentedness. And, we live in a culture where, according to all the, dishwashing detergent commercials, you're supposed to be overjoyed all the time. With have a beaming smile because your whites came out white or whatever. And that's not what it is. And I think these people are trying to find some measure of happiness. And I think there's something satisfying about that. I don't, despite the fact that we've described these as a bunch of stories about super depressed people, I actually think it's kind of a hopeful collection of stories.
I agree.
And I think the level of cartooning is amazing, as we've said, and every story is really different, despite the thematic similarities. They're just drawn and presented and laid out so differently that it's every page turn was a surprise.
No, I would not hesitate to recommend this to somebody. I feel like I don't have the artistic knowledge to critically represent what I'm reading here enough, and I don't think I've done a sufficient job in this conversation. I think I've tried to draw it back to things I know or things I've experienced or things I've reflected on. That's how I'm navigating this discussion. But I would certainly recommend to anybody out there who wants to learn more about Eleanor Davis, beyond reading Eleanor Davis, Hilary Brown's articles. Okay. If you search for those on Paste, or as I said before, the Comics Journal, which is more long form reflection, meditation on Eleanor Davis, I would recommend reading those because she really gets stuck into it, and she's written about her quite a bit, as I said. So there's plenty there for you to get your teeth into as well.
Yeah, and also track down You and a Bike and a Road if you can find a copy of it. That book is really amazing.
How to Be Happy is published by Fantagraphics. Libby's Dad is published by Retrofit. You can help Deconstructing Comics and all our podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Emmet and I are back next week with our series on bios and autobios of Stan Lee. We had intended to do the book Excelsior, by Stan Lee and George Mayer next, but it proved to take longer than we expected to get a hold of copies of it. So this time we'll be talking about Stan's other autobio, told in comics format, Amazing, Fantastic, Incredible, a Marvelous Memoir, with Peter David and Colleen Doran. Also, I'm planning to pull up a few classic clips for our 700th episode. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.